Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Marco Arcelli, CEO, ACWA Power. Meg Gentle, Executive Director, HIF Global. Pratima Rangarajan, CEO, Climate Investment. Danny Rice, CEO, Net Power. Darryl Willis, Corporate Vice President, Energy and Resources Industry, Microsoft. Moderator, Lubna Bouza, Editor-in-Chief of Business News and presenter at Sky News Arabia.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, esteemed panelists, salve, a very good morning to all of you, and thank you for joining us. I'm honored to welcome you to this panel discussion on building tomorrow's energy system today. It's a topic of paramount importance in our rapidly evolving world. As we navigate a very difficult landscape of energy, we are confronted with pressing challenges, from geopolitical tensions to, of course, policy impacts. We will try to cover some or all of that with their help. Thank you very much, gentlemen and ladies, for joining us and for making the time. Let's dive right into it. And Marco, let me ask you a general question. In your mind, what is the most efficient, effective way to get to net zero by 2050?
So that's an interesting question, and you can take it from multiple perspectives, whether it's a technology or what you need in terms of people and all the soft things that we need. But I would like always to remind people that we're not talking about a trilemma today, but we're talking effectively of a quadrilemma. So we need to add speed to whatever we're doing. And I think it was mentioned by Lorenzo also that we need to accelerate everything that we're doing. So let me tell you a little bit about what we are doing. I think that renewables today, we don't even have to talk about it. They're the safest, the cheapest, the fastest technology that you can deploy, and you see that they're deployed everywhere. At ACWA Power, we reached already from being basically negligible in renewables 5-6 years ago to today being 46% of our portfolio, and 80% of our new installations will be in renewables. We believe that there's going to be a balanced mix of technologies that are needed. I think personally that combined cycles and gas-fired power generation is the best technology basically to provide a backup and storage solution, flexibility to the system. So we're also developing that, and we plan to probably double the capacity by 2030 in some of the countries that are going through some of the massive, most ambitious decarbonization programs in the world, like Saudi Arabia, like the Emirates, but also Central Asia and part of Southeast Asia and Africa. I think the two key aspects that we need to address today, however, one is the hard-to-abate sectors. And we are a pioneer in green molecules. So we are one of the partners of the NEOM Green Hydrogen Project with NEOM and Air Products. That is the first large-scale plant that will supply green ammonia to the world, producing it where it's cheapest, so Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, and bringing it to the big consumption in Europe and the Far East. So that's the first thing that we need to accelerate together. The other one is another adjacent sector, which is water. We increasingly start to talk about water stress. We are the largest desalination company in the world, and so we're starting now to pioneer not only efficiency on the water desalination technology. We brought down the specific consumption to produce it from 15 to 3 kilowatt-hour per cubic meter that you're producing, so really massive also in terms of the lower cost at which you can produce. But now we're greenifying, so we already have one solution that runs on 100% solar power for large-scale application, and we're looking to roll it out.
Amazing. Thank you, Marco. Let me move to you, Danny. Over the past 10 to 15 years, I think there has been a significant attention to carbon intensity and reducing emissions. However, my question here, how crucial it is while doing that to not compromise on the energy of today needed, affordability, liability, security, and sustainability?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think it's really one of the more important and pressing ones in the world today is how do we ensure access to affordable, reliable energy while at the same time reducing the carbon intensity of it. I think the way I've always looked at the world is really there's kind of two key pathways to decarbonization of really what Net Power is focused on, which is the power industry. It's the largest source of emissions in the world, and with just growing electrification, you're just seeing more and more energy demand move over to the grid. And so as we look at just decarbonization in the most sustainable, responsible way, there's really two key pathways. The one is starting with renewables, and you're starting with a low carbon intensity, and in some cases a zero carbon intensity, but you're trying to find ways to scale it and make it affordable and reliable. And that has major challenges that we don't need to get into right now. The other way, which is the more contrarian approach, which is start from a place of the most affordable, most reliable source of energy. And I think as we've heard speakers on prior panels talk about, natural gas is one of the most abundant, resourceful, reliable, affordable forms of power we have. Take that, and with technology, try to reduce its carbon intensity. And that's ultimately what we're focused on. And I think for us, it's an unorthodox pathway, because it's one where, when we look at decarbonization, it actually requires more fossil fuels. And so it's a total paradigm shift for people to think that we can actually achieve a better pathway to net zero using more fossil fuels. But it requires technologies like what Net Power is developing in conjunction with Baker Hughes to achieve it.
I will come back to the gas point and discuss it with you, although Dan left nothing for me to discuss when it comes to the new decision by the American administration. But before that, Darryl, I think everyone emphasized on how important technology is going forward. However, I'm going to give you some numbers. According to the IEA, 35% of the CO2 emission reductions needed in the net zero scenario by 2050 come from technologies that still in development, or they haven't reached commercial scale. How crucial and important it is for us to develop and implement existing technology and emerging ones.
I would say that the short answer is that it's very important for us to do that. And one of the things that I was struck by as we listened to Lorenzo's keynote this morning was having myself spent almost 30 years in the oil and gas industry, just how this industry does amazing things. The energy sector does amazing things. It's one of the most innovative industries on the planet. That said, I believe that all of the challenges we're facing when it comes to decarbonization, net zero by 2050 or sooner, we can tackle if we do it together. I think that was another theme I heard around partnership. It's so important. There are big opportunities, as you've heard today, and Microsoft is interested and involved in many of them around CCUS, around hydrogen, around SMRs, and reducing fugitive emissions from methane, even working with power and utility companies on DERMS. Those are all important things, and we're thinking about how do we use data, more importantly, to drive and accelerate. There's another theme I've heard this morning around the pace. That is so important. How do we use data? How do we use generative AI to actually get things done a lot faster? Because at the end of the day, for us, big, actually, I should say fast beats big, and open beats closed. So we're really excited about the challenges, and we believe if we partner and work together, we can do anything.
Give us an example. You work with a lot of oil and gas companies. Give us an example of a collaboration you've done with them, trying to boost a certain technology that actually worked.
So one of the projects, I'll give you two examples. One is the CCUS project in Norway, the Northern Lights project, where Microsoft is partnered with the country of Norway, with Equinor, Total, and Shell on that particular CCS project, which is scheduled to come online sometime mid this year, mid 2024. Another example I would share is some work we're doing with Avanade and Accenture on a platform that will help mitigate and address and get in front of fugitive emissions associated with methane.
Speaking of technologies, Meg, let me move to you. HIF Global is an e-fuels company. Tell us more about it and how to scale up.
So what are e-fuels? Let's start with that. E-fuels are synthetic hydrocarbons that are made from green hydrogen and recycled CO2. When you reconnect the hydrogen and the CO2, you have a hydrocarbon. Our pathway, we start with methanol production. and then the methanol can be further synthesized into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel. We're actually producing these fuels today in southern Chile in a pilot project, and it produces methanol and gasoline, and Porsche actually purchases all of the gasoline and uses it in their experience centers. So the next stage for us then is the scale up. And the first commercial scale facility is designed for the US. It'll be 1.8 gigawatts of power for the electrolyzers to make the green hydrogen. And we're about 90% complete with the feed, so almost finished with feed, and from an engineering standpoint, ready for construction. So these are existing technologies, and the scale up is ready to happen now. So what do we need next to be able to implement those projects? We need long-term contracts. Of course, we need financing, but financing will follow any project that's properly structured. And we need completion of a lot of policies around the world, and they have to get much more rational. They have to get focused on life cycle analysis and a simple method for accounting for carbon everywhere that doesn't try to pick winners and losers and anticipate technology. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about policy.
You use the same infrastructure of today, right? You don't need to create your own infrastructure. Is that right?
All of the fuels are used by existing infrastructure. Yeah. So they go straight into, like today, the Porsche 911 car engine. They are exactly the same as jet fuel, so they get used by existing airplanes. So that is one of the best things about e-fuels, is we don't have to have a complete turnover in the worldwide infrastructure. We use what's in place today.
Great. Pratima, building on what she mentioned, when I asked her how to scale up, she said, we want long-term contracts, we want financing that will probably follow, and of course policies to be in place for those technologies. We met last year, you and me, in the Climate Tech Forum in Abu Dhabi, and we did discuss the challenges faced by emerging and existing technology. Can you list for us the top 3 in your mind?
Yeah, so maybe I'll step back a little bit and say what's the problem we're trying to solve.
Of course.
And when you look at private capital for innovation, the real challenge we have is that 80%, more than 80% of the private capital is addressing renewables or EVs. And that's only 20% of the emissions. So that's why everyone calls the rest hard to abate. They're not really hard to abate. Nobody's tried, right? So let's first take the capital and put it where it needs to go, which is to solve the large fraction. And if you look there, over 60% of the technologies are available today. So the next piece is deployment.
Do you think all of it are actually
60%.
60%. Oh.
And the rest are being created, but I think 60% is a really good place to start, to deploy, right? And yet we're not making progress. Emissions are going up, not down. So I'd like to, and I think the panelists here are fantastic, because they are trying to address the hard-to-abate sectors. But one common theme in new technologies is we're all talking about things that are going to take decades for infrastructure to really scale. It's what it is in these sectors. So I come back to what Lorenzo started with, which is let's start by decarbonizing current infrastructure at the same time. And we don't hear a lot about that, right? So Lorenzo, lots of credit to you to talk about things that aren't really sexy, like efficiency. But the reason to do it is twofold. One is you get a hit immediately, right? My portfolio of investments has delivered over the past few years 80 million tons of CO2 equivalent. That's hard. I mean, CCUS, the entire global CCUS capability portfolio right now is 50-some million tons. So this is a huge number. And they did it just from methane, most of it from methane. So you can get it, low-hanging fruit. The second piece, I think, that we've really got to focus on is what was referred to by Lorenzo as efficiency. But let me tell you the problem statement, right? If we look at Sankey diagrams today, and anyone who's not seen a Sankey diagram should go check it out, Lawrence Livermore Labs, over 60%, 2/3 of the primary energy we create today is actually wasted through the process efficiency, right? And that's before we turn on the lights. So it's probably closer to 3/4 is wasted, which means that now when we get e-fuels, when we get all these new technologies, we're overlaying them on an extremely inefficient infrastructure. So that's why it's really important. That's why the trillions are going through the roof. We have to deal with that. So that's the second piece. And the third is, as we think about these new technologies, AI, for example, let's take a systems look at what is the carbon footprint. Because this year, we finally saw that after years of US utilities, power needs in the United States going down, we're starting to see it go up. And most of these AI and new technologies we're going to have, digital doesn't mean it's emissions-free. So for everything, we need to take a systems view as we bring in new technologies, as we select what we need to do next.
Amazing. Of course, those are very important and valid points. But I'm gonna, changing gears. I'm just gonna discuss a couple of things that might have a direct impact on everything we're doing today. So addressing the elephant in the room, Marco, let me ask you about the increasing geopolitical tensions. ACWA Power is a Saudi company. You're a national champion there. How do you think that the increasing geopolitical tension might impact the attention, focus, and financing going to achieving the net zero today?
So
and we can take the reference, the Ukraine-Russian war, by the way.
Yeah. To be honest, every morning, I moved to Saudi Arabia about a year ago, and every morning I wake up and I'm grateful to be there. Because in a world that is riddled with concerns and fear about the future, I think that today Saudi Arabia offers a beacon and an island of stability and hope for the future that comes first from Vision 2030 and the big decarbonization program that is going on there. Just to give you an idea of the order of magnitude, 20 gigawatt of renewables, more than 7 gigawatt of combined cycle, 2 gigawatt of battery storage will be awarded and installed every year for the next few years. I see every month, tens, dozens of delegations of high levels, so presidential, prime minister, ministers coming to Saudi Arabia to look for a dialogue that Saudi Arabia is fostering for many regions, for Africa, Central Asia, and now, of course, for the areas of bigger tension, Ukraine and the Middle East. And they all come besides the geopolitical discussions that, of course, are not in my domain. They come to talk, to do business, and say, ACWA Power, can you come and help us decarbonize also our system? And I think that is a sign that Saudi Arabia is turning from the biggest exporter of oil to the biggest exporter of low-carbon expertise and technologies. We have achieved the lowest cost of photovoltaic, the lowest cost of desalinated water, and also in green hydrogen. We recently launched our second project in Uzbekistan. It took us less than 1 year from concept to groundbreaking, and it will be about 1 year from groundbreaking to bring it to production. So we are accelerating, we are basically developing and bringing together the expertise and the technologies to make it happen. Now, of course, what we see is beyond the Middle East and beyond Ukraine, which, by the way, create, of course, issues and complexity on projects that you need to manage. Just simply think about logistics, logistics in Central Asia, now logistics in the Red Sea. Of course, it's something that operationally you need to manage. But I look beyond. Now we are in 12 countries in the Global South, and moving from Europe and the US, where I worked my career, to managing assets and growth in the Global South, open your minds and a different perspective. So how can we help countries that are not installing all the capacity that they need in power, in water, in other fuels, basically to emerge and elevate them and make them more prosperous so that they can contribute and release also some of these geopolitical tensions. What we're trying to do is to bring everybody together at the table, and Lorenzo mentioned earlier that private companies and the trust in private companies is at an all-time high to do that. So that's what we're trying to do, bring in development finance institution, bring in private capital on the equity, on the debt side, bring in the technologies together. And I think I hate to always go back to green hydrogen that is just emerging, but if you think about it, one of the reasons why projects are not going ahead in the Global South is risk. If you think about a green hydrogen or green ammonia project for export, effectively, it's like you're building an oil and gas project. That means a project that is dollarized, that is partly offshored, and reduces the risk of developing the projects, reduces the cost, and create a scale at the local level that can enable the further development of renewables in the country to elevate the local people.
Thank you, Marco. Meg, do you think it's a threat or a catalyst to accelerating the process, the geopolitical tensions?
So none of us want geopolitical tensions happening in the world. In a way, they are a catalyst for renewable energies happening in local countries, because countries are becoming more and more focused on energy security and monetizing their own wind and solar resources and reducing their reliance on oil and gas, and therefore reducing their exposure to risk on a worldwide basis. I think the balance for that, though, is that the geopolitical tensions always increase cost. And so for this, what's becoming essentially our modern day industrial revolution, with a lot of investment needed in new infrastructure, either to produce fuels or to consume renewable power, new transmission lines, all of these things require a lot of capital, a lot of investment, and we need low interest rates and sort of stability in the world to try to bring those costs down. So that's, I think, the plus and minus of global tensions, but overall, even amid the tensions that we're having today, projects are still getting done, they're coming to construction, and there's sort of a new focus on the energy decisions that people are making for their economy.
Thank you, Meg. So addressing the other elephant in the room, I think it's, of course, the China, US, Europe race when it comes to climate tech. Darryl, let me bring you here. China added more solar panels in 2023 than US did in the entire history. What is that China is doing that is making China in the leadership for years when it comes to technology and climate technology? So they're the leaders, whether we like it or not. Why?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I was an expert on China, but I'm not. But I'll give you some thoughts. I think that as I reflect on that question, one of the things that is so important that countries do and companies do is to lean in and stay leaned in and stay the course. I think we have to stay the course on everything we do, and what we can't afford to do as a country, the West, or even as companies, is to start and stop, because we lose lots of momentum. I think it's really important also for us to think about forming unusual partnerships. I was reflecting last night on the fact that one of the first partnerships that I had the privilege of being a part of when I joined Microsoft 5 years ago was with Baker Hughes. And so a Microsoft and a Baker Hughes coming together in partnership is very unusual. And many people will ask the question, what in the world is Microsoft doing working with oil and gas companies and mining companies and power and utility companies and nuclear companies? Because the world needs access to energy, and partnership is so important. And I think that one of the things we tried at one point in the US, for example, was tariffs on solar. I don't think you can get ahead by trying to slow down the competition. You've got to figure out how to stay in front of the competition. We used to also say, back in my days at BP, or in the industry in general, we want to be first to go second. I think you have to be first, you have to want to go first to go first. It's not enough to go second, especially as the world continues to change with the evolution and orientation we're taking towards generative AI. So that's a long answer to a short question.
It's all right, I'll take that. Danny, the competition between the US, of course, you're familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act and, of course, the other stimulus packages by Europe. Do you see this competition that he mentioned slowing both down or not?
So in terms of what the Inflation Reduction Act really means to us in the United States, around carbon sequestration, there's a program under the Inflation Reduction Act called the 45Q, where the federal government will pay you $85 per ton for each ton of CO2 that you capture and permanently sequester underground. And what that provides is a fantastic incentive to capture CO2 emissions. And if you can do it right, on the right applications with the right technologies, you can actually make carbon-free power or carbon-free products actually lower cost than the carbon-emitting alternative. And that's ultimately what we're doing with Net Power. And I think, you know, to Darryl's point on the China piece, I think one of the things we all universally agree on, regardless of where China is on AI and with clean energy transition, they're still the largest consumer of coal and the world's largest emitter of CO2. And so ultimately, like, any goal on getting to net zero requires decarbonizing China. And so we're going to have to pull out all the stops. And so I think from our seat with what we're doing in Net Power on transforming natural gas into a zero-emission power source, being able to use the 45Q under the Inflation Reduction Act is a catalyst for us. Because what it allows us to do is scale up deployments in the United States or in other places around the world where there is a price on carbon, either an incentive like we have in the US or a carbon tax like they have in Canada and some other places in the world. That allows us to scale up to get our costs down to a place where a carbon-free source of power generation with our plants is actually as economic or more economic than the carbon-emitting alternative. Mm-hmm. And if we can get to that place, then you get to a place where you can compete without a subsidy in places like China and really help them transition from coal to natural gas to carbon-free natural gas into other sources of power. Mm-hmm. So the key for us is we need to find ways to scale these technologies in those markets where the regulatory environment is favorable, but also those natural resources, in our case natural gas, and the sequestration capacity is there that allows us to economically scale to get those costs down.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think of the new decision by Biden administration to pause the new projects for exporting LNG?
Well, there's pros and cons to it. I think, unfortunately, for a lot of our allies across the world, it's going to cause like a higher cost of power. It's going to cause a lot of countries to move back to coal. So it's going to be very counterproductive on a global scale for emissions, which is unfortunate. You know, I think as everybody's seen over the last 15 years, the U.S.'s playbook to decarbonize has been coal to gas switching. And it hasn't been because of government subsidies. It's just been the free market and the oil and gas industry just figuring out new technologies to be able to increase the production of natural gas to reduce the cost to make it more competitive. And so what you're seeing with this potential ban, and Secretary Crabtree talked about, there's still another 50 BCF a day of LNG export capacity coming to the market over the next decade. The reality is it could cause lower natural gas prices in the United States. It'll make natural gas more competitive for power generation in the United States. Maybe it'll help displace more coal power generation here, but it's probably going to compete more with renewables for a lower cost source of power generation. So I think it's going to have an unintended consequence, which isn't the one that they were aspiring for.
Okay, thank you. Pratima, we always discuss investments, and I think you cannot get anywhere unless you have the money to do so. The money invested, actually, the money invested on a yearly basis in clean energy is around 1.2 trillion. But if you want to get where we want to get by 2050, we need to double and triple the amount, so about 5 trillion. How important is the partnership between private sector, public sector? What do we need more as private sector and from the government side to probably boost this financing and bring more money to the table?
Yeah, I think 1.2 trillion, we say it's too little because our models say it's too little. But I'd like to see if we see 1.2 trillion of results yet. So I'll push back a little on the capital, because there's more capital than we've ever seen before in 2023 in climate. But I don't see that we have the results that's commensurate with the capital, and deployment really taking projects forward in delivering results is still relatively slow. So I think absolutely right, we need these public-private partnerships. I mean, when we did the UK Net Zero Teesside, the first CCS hub in the world, it was with a partnership with the UK government. The US government with the DOE, EPA, and then you heard here about lots of partnerships. And I think it's absolutely necessary. And the reason is, it's similar to this LNG discussion from today. Let's take it back to, I think you were trying to bring it back into this policies and governments, is that surprise is not good for private industry, right? You come in with a surprise and you have stranded assets. And now you have all these people who are stuck with their LNG investments, believing in the forward progress of policies as provided. So I think it's one of the fundamental principles that private industry needs some guarantee when they invest, because the other unintended consequence of this announcement is everyone's going to be even more skittish about moving quickly with the money they've already promised, which is actually a real sadness, right? And we see this all over the world. We see this in the UK, where they've reversed policies quite a bit, right? I think the other one is one that you just brought up about China. And I'll just say a couple things maybe there. One is China has industrial policy every 5 years. They publish their 5-year plan. Everyone knows where it's going. There's nothing wrong with industrial policy. It brings you forward. And we knew solar prices, costs would go down years ago when we saw their 5-year plan in those days, right? The second piece is China has its own set of rules, how you do business in China around lots of things, including intellectual property, that's evolved over the years. When other countries in the West do it, we say now it's protectionism. But I'll just say every country needs industrial policy, and it's going to have a set of rules. We just need in private industry to play. The problem in climate with this is that the climate doesn't see those national boundaries. So what worked for everything else is not working for us in climate. The second place we've put, we humans, put our national boundaries is even in the UN mandated goals. They're country by country. So it makes complete sense for the US maybe to put this natural gas, LNG issue. But to the point that was just made by my colleague here to my right, then it just means that coal is going to proliferate. But because we have nationally determined goals, not internationally determined goals, we're kind of stuck in this business. And so I think really the issue is geopolitics and country boundaries versus emissions and climate, which is a global phenomenon.
Speaking of the investment from China, let me share some numbers with you. In 2022, 91% of the investment made in climate tech was actually Chinese. Today, they produce 85% of the solar panels and 75% worldwide electrical vehicle batteries. Meg, you have something to say here.
No, I wanted to expand a little bit about what Pratima was saying about investments, and I agree completely that the capital is there, and it's easy to deploy it today on things that are $20 million at a time. So experimental and incubator types of technologies, but to actually get to $5 trillion a year, we have to be putting it into very large projects. And large capital deployment is not going to take risk on policy. We've made a little bit of progress from where we were last year, where everything was in draft. So now we have RED 3 came through, EU Maritime, EU Aviation. US policy is still in draft. So we have, 6 more months at least before we know what the hydrogen bill is. And we have an incredible opportunity for Asia to come through on clear and coherent carbon accounting policies that don't try to have so many rules as we've seen in Europe and the US. And this is going to be really, really critical, where we accept life cycle analysis and industrial CO2 recycling. That's how we're going to get major deployment of the capital that's ready.
And maybe just to support Meg for a second, China has always invested in scaling. In the US, in the Western countries, we're all stuck with R&D. We love R&D, new flashy things. But when it comes to scaling, there's no state, there's not as much capital, and there's not the policy that you were talking about, which is the private-public partnership. That's what China does well. So expect technologies to go towards Asia if we don't have scaling capital to provide. So absolutely.
Thank you. Darryl.
I was just going to add that as Microsoft, as you all probably know, we're building lots of data centers to support the businesses that we're running around the world. And as a result of that, it's caused us to have to create a climate innovation fund. So we've established a $1 billion fund to invest in projects that will not only help us meet our energy demands, but also help us meet our net zero ambitions by 2030. It's a big challenge, and so we find ourselves having to get into this investment in the climate in a direct way with real dollars, not only through Microsoft, but also working with Bill Gates and Breakthrough Energy Ventures as well to really try to move the ball forward.
I think we're running out of time. I have 2 questions, and I'll ask all of you, but if possibly to give me a short answer. Sir, are we on the right track to building tomorrow's energy system today?
I think we are on the right track. I was incredibly inspired by, and I'll be brief, I was incredibly inspired by the opening video and the keynotes that we heard. I also sit here thinking, as a former explorationist, I remember when I drove my first well, if we found natural gas, it was considered the wrong product in a dry hole, and we plugged it. And so now we're talking about natural gas as a transition and destination fuel. I think the future is full of possibility. If we continue to coordinate and work with each other, we can do anything.
Are we?
I think we will get there. And obviously, we're very biased with what we're doing at Net Power, but I think coming into Net Power, I took a very sober, objective view of the world to really understand, like, what are the various pathways, what are the technologies that really can help us both achieve all of the energy needs as the world continues to move from a lower class to a middle class amongst the 6 billion people that are living below, essentially, the poverty line, while decarbonizing at the same time. So it is a tightrope act that we're trying to pull off. And we don't have the solutions today that deliver that energy trifecta. If there was any energy source out there that could deliver clean, affordable, reliable energy, it would be the primary source of energy we all use. But there's trade-offs with every single form of energy. And that's why you have to build a portfolio. But that's why you also need to take a long-term view to innovate with patience and then scale those things with urgency as you develop them. And I think that's one of the challenges we have here is there's such a pressing need to meet 2030, 2035 goals that we're not giving the industry or the world the time to develop these long-term solutions. And so I think that's one of the things that I impress upon people is this is not going to be an easy transition. It requires a lot of time, and it just becomes a lot more dangerous and unrealistic if we start to set more and more tighter time frames to hit it. But if you really can take a 2050, 2070 view, that gives us the time to develop things like what we're developing in Net Power, which transforms natural gas into clean power. And those become long-term scalable solutions on a global scale.
Okay.
And we need time to develop those sorts of solutions.
Okay. Pratima.
It's not a technological transition. We know how to innovate. It's a behavioral transition. And we humans have to change.
So are we on the right track, you think?
Not yet.
Not yet. Meg?
I think a lot of the foundation is well laid. So we have policy, we have capital that's ready, we have commitments, from leaders like Microsoft and many other industries who are actually voluntarily making the change. We have, Baker Hughes and others who are leading the industry on technology and trying to be in the space before those technologies are needed. So we're, I think, on track on laying the foundation. What we need now is to be able to accelerate the big deployment and move faster. So we're going faster than I think the energy sector anticipated that we would, but not fast enough to meet the goals. But I'm optimistic that we'll get there.
Marco.
We'll get there. So I think that there are three ingredients. One is, yes, it's a long-term prospect, set measurable KPIs to reach in the next few years. So take Saudi Arabia, 50-50 renewables and gas by 2030, and then you move from there. So always measure and do it in incremental steps that you can deliver on. The second is, in the short term, bring together different technologies to decarbonize better, to offer also other mitigation solutions. For instance, at Red Sea Global, one of the biggest tourist destinations, we do all the utilities in Saudi Arabia. One of them is for wastewater. So we take all the waste coming from the resorts and the accommodation of the staff, and basically we use the nutrients to create mangrove wetlands, and then the residual water goes to the nursery to create plants, 30 million plants, basically for all the landscaping. So we're turning a desert green, basically using the waste, and that's technologies we have today. Looking forward, there's going to be new technologies. So Baker Hughes and everybody else will develop new technologies that we don't know about today. Think about 20 years past, we couldn't tell that green hydrogen would be where it is today here, renewables, green water, and all that. Who knows in 2040, 2045 what we will have, but I'm sure that we will be able to reach that.
By yes or no, can we achieve net zero by 2050? Marco?
That's it. We got it.
Meg?
Yes.
Pratima? 2050? Yes or no?
2030.
That's
what we need.
Okay. Danny?
Yeah.
Yeah, Darryl?
Yes.
Thank you very much. As we wrap up this discussion, I would really thank you for being here, for contributing to this crucial dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, challenges are significant, but our collective commitment to innovation and collaboration is a powerful force for change. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your views. Please do enjoy the rest of the day and the discussion that will take place today. And let's continue together the journey toward a net zero future, and let's energize the change. Thank you very much.